All right. Well, I am so excited to see so many faces here tonight. I think we hit a record probably for tonight's meeting. So, thank you. Very excited about tonight's presentation. Hope you are too. I wanted to introduce our panelists. So, if our panelists will come up as I call them. First up is Joe Schulz. So, Joe Schulz is the AVP for Emerging Technologies with Orasi. He's been doing this a while.
Say how long.
He's been focused exclusively in the mobile space for the last 4 years now. Is that right? 4 years. So very excited to have Joe. Michael Cooper.
Yep.
So Michael was recently headed up the QA practice at T-Mobile. Can you hear me? No? Maybe I'll use this. Can you hear me now? So Mike Cooper recently headed up the T-Mobile QA practice years back, and also spent some time recently with HP, and now he's running his own organizations with healthcare, mobile, and one other track as well. Salesforce, yes. Thank you. And last but not least, Dan McFall, VP of Sales for Mobile Labs, a local device management company, actually right down the road from here. So a lot of experience there with the device management track. Welcome. Thank you. Yeah, please. All right. So what we're going to do is each speaker, I'm going to open with a few slides with an overview on mobile testing, and then each speaker is going to get up and talk for a few minutes on their track. Each speaker has a different area of expertise in the mobile testing space. So we're going to kind of do a brief overview, just a few slides each, and then after about 15 minutes of that, we're going to open it up to full interactive. You can ask questions. We'll go off and go from there. Okay. So the first thing that I like to talk about a lot at various conferences, hopefully you can see that.
I think my head's in the way.
So one of the first things I talk about with clients is, how do you define mobile? You know, is a laptop mobile? Is a kiosk considered mobile? And you know, of course, I have a couple definitions here on what the dictionary will tell you. We see, you know, ruggedized devices. I see some clients that actually exclude tablets from their definition of mobile, or they'll include laptops in their definition. Whatever it is, you know, the main point here is be consistent. And if you ask me, really, mobile is anything that can be connected, right? We have a huge trend right now with wearables, Internet of Things, connected refrigerators that are talking to us, self-driving cars. So it's really any of these things, if you ask me. And in today's space, we see a lot of issues around poor quality. So 65% of apps today have a 1-star rating or less. Quite a few applications. It's really a sad state of affairs with mobility. But we're going to talk about how to address some of those challenges tonight. And one of the interesting data points here, Amazon did a study on what it costs for a user to experience a 1-second delay. So a 1-second delay costs users, or costs Amazon $1.6 billion a year in revenue loss from having a 4-second response time versus having a 3-second response time. So again, just shows you the power of really the impact of the cost of poor quality. Just some snapshots here of some of the issues that we've seen over the last 12 months. A lot of these issues are well exceeding over $1 billion in total costs. Capgemini, in collaboration with HP, recently published a World Quality Report. This report interviews executives from around the world, basically to talk about what's top of mind for them, pain points, how much are they spending on QA, testing services, outsourcing budgets, and whatnot. So some interesting data points here. This report was just recently published, the 6th annual report, a few weeks ago. And these were some of the key findings. I'm not going to read through all of these. We'll share this content with you after the presentation so you can go through. But the main point here is the top one. Everyone here is familiar with SMAC, Social Mobile Analytics Cloud. So transformational programs. Are basically, the focus is becoming much more heavy with these areas, such as social and mobile. So, and with that,
Thank you. Actually, Costa, can I mention one thing about the World Quality Report?
sure, go ahead, Mike.
Yep. Yeah, I was actually when I was just recently with HP and was one of the contributing authors. And one of the things from a mobile perspective is it's unbelievable how much mobile testing has increased. I think a couple of years ago it was 30%, and now it's over 80%. But
Yes.
the reason why I wanted to mention this is you can benchmark your own company. You can go to www.worldqualityreport.com/benchmark, or you find the benchmark app. You put in your numbers. This is how much you're spending on a budget. These are your challenges and so forth, and it'll compare you across the industry. And you'll actually get a PDF delivered to you in your email, kind of comparing you against the 1,500 people we interviewed.
Thank you. All right, so first up, Joe's going to talk to us about test strategy and process. There you go.
All right, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Everybody getting their food, getting drinks? All right, we'll get all set. As Costa said, we're just going to talk for a few minutes each about our area, our specialty area. I'm kind of the process guy, so what I've done for the last 25 years is work on development and testing process, and looked at how to apply technology intelligently to the right places. And so the last 4 years I've focused on mobile specifically and worked on mobile testing technologies, trying to figure out ways to apply technologies through either assistance or automation in some cases, right, to tackle this testing problem that you guys all have. So that's kind of where my background is and where I'm coming from. A couple points I'd like to make before we get started. One is how big mobile is. You may not realize how big mobile is, but here's a statistic I think is interesting and kind of relevant. So there's 7 billion people in the world, roughly, right? 7 billion. 6 billion of them have a mobile phone. 6 billion people. That means 1 out of every 7 people in the world don't have a phone. Everyone else does. That's staggering. And in comparison, to give you an idea how that compares, in comparison, only 4.5 billion people have something else. What do you think that something else is? Anybody? Question?
Fresh water.
Fresh water, that's close. That's a good answer. Not what I'm looking for.
Indoor
but-
plumbing was my second guess.
Well,
see?
you're absolutely right. Second is flushable toilet, indoor plumbing, right?
Wow.
So think about that for a minute. That means 2 out of 3 people that have a cell phone have a toilet, but 1 out of 3 don't, right? More people have a toilet, have a mobile phone than have a toilet. That's how big this problem is. So when you're thinking about your mobile apps and your mobile process and your mobile testing, right? You're not thinking about this little widget that somebody's going to use once in a while. This is a pervasive, life-changing kind of thing. This is a sea change in IT that we haven't seen in a long time, right? The last big sea change like this was the internet. That was kind of the last major change, was web-based stuff. So when we start thinking about our process, you can't just take your existing process and add 2% to it, right? This is a sea change to the way things are done in IT. So you need to be thinking about creative new ideas in terms of how to attack development and testing for these technologies. So that's something that I don't think people realize. A lot of people are trying to take their existing old process, which frankly is probably rooted in information engineering from the 1980s, and they're trying to add a mobile component to it. And that's not necessarily going to work. You might get some value, but to really address mobile technologies, you need to be thinking about changing your process. Now, I don't mean throwing things away, but thinking about how you would use the tools today to address these kinds of problems. And the other kind of relevant statistic that I think is important are these two here on the screen. How many of you would be willing to put up with a mobile app that didn't work and keep using it day after day after day, right? We don't do that with any piece of software. But what's I think most people don't realize, most developers and testers don't realize, is that 90% of all apps are used one time and then deleted. One time and then deleted, right? So that means you as a QA professional have one shot at your population, right? So they're going to download your app, they're going to try it one time, and if it doesn't work exactly the way they expected, and I don't mean that it works the way you expected, right? I mean the way they expected, then they're going to delete it and go get another one, because there's a million other apps out there they can try. So quality becomes extremely important. So not only is this a pervasive sea change kind of thing, right, but it's an extremely important milestone for you as a company. And I can't tell you how many apps I've seen that companies have just outsourced them to an independent developer. They throw it up on the website and then they get a 1-star review. And guess what? You can never come back from that 1-star review. It's really, really difficult to break that initial perception that people have. So keep that in mind. And then finally, the last point I want to make for the night is continuous is where it's at. This is true in development. It's true in testing as well. And when I talk about continuous, there's continuous testing, continuous integration, continuous delivery, all these buzzwords that the vendors are using these days. The point is, regardless of what you call it and how you spin it, the point is that you, as quality professionals, need to be directly involved in the development process. And I think that's something that far too often QA doesn't see. QA is generally, in a lot of large organizations, a separate silo. There's a development team, there's a QA team, and we have a very well-defined process for turning things over from one team to the other. Some people will do that on a repetitive basis. I'm not talking necessarily about old waterfall style, but they'll still see it as two separate jobs and two separate sets of people. And I'll tell you right now, in my opinion, and this is, maybe controversial, maybe you don't want to hear this, maybe you disagree with me, but in my opinion, 5 years from now, there will not be a QA COE. There will be a development, quality, and delivery organization that creates all of these applications. And we'll go from a continuous process where a developer hits the save button and through a bunch of automated and process hoops, we'll get an application delivered to a website or to a mobile staging platform automatically. So think about that, because that changes, for most of you in this organization, that completely changes your job role. Now, I'm not saying you have to become developers, but I'm saying your organization should be thinking about integrating development and QA so that QA is not the obstacle to development getting into delivery, right? So that's a big change for people. Now, it's going to take a long time to do. It's going to take a long time to happen. It's taken a long time for the agile stuff that we've been talking about for 15 years to start happening, right? But it's happening now. Most all of you guys have agile shops, agile efforts in your organization of some sort today. So it's going to take a while, but the point is you need to be thinking about that, right? I had a meeting with a VP of QA about a month ago, and we had this very same discussion, and she was like, well, what am I going to be doing in 5 years? And I said, well, you're either going to be part of the solution or you're going to be looking for another job. I mean, really, there's not going to be VP of QA kinds of positions, I don't think, in 5 or 10 years. So that's another big change that you need to be thinking about from a process perspective. All right, and with that, I'll close my comments and turn it over to... Oops, I went too far.
Do the other panelists agree with Joe?
No, hold on, I'm coming up next.
Yeah, these guys get the chance to rebut.
I didn't realize we were having a debate, but
Yeah, Mike's up next, so he gets a chance to. He gets a chance.
I'm not in a debate, not at all. So,
it's okay. He can be wrong. I don't mind.
no, it's okay. It's funny because last time I was here was it probably 2004, and I was president of the club at that time, and somebody made a very same speech about XP, that QA as a function would not be around anymore. I think a few of you in the room were here on that night, and everybody was kind of quaking in their boots that XP was coming, and there wasn't going to be a QA profession. Now, as I mentioned, I've been working on the World Quality Report for the last couple of years. And there are a couple of trends. In terms of TCOEs, well, first of all, Agile is exploding. With HP over the last 2 years, I've traveled to 6 continents. That's every continent except for Antarctica, talking about testing and meeting with QA professionals. And there's 2 trends. One is QA moving closer to development in an Agile movement, okay? And the other is the growth of the TCOE. So and if you look at the stats that are here, and you can download them, TCOE a few years ago was 4% of all companies. Now it's at 26%. Okay, so that's the facts. That's people being interviewed. So it's growing, and I think every week I get a call that says, we've got a group of, we want you to lead a team of 2,000 people at Deutsche Bank, or we've got a growing TCOE at Travel Corp locally, and there's all kinds of TCOEs growing. So I liken it to, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but we'll get into the mobile in a second. And I used to lead the TCOE, if you will, but I didn't call it a TCOE at T-Mobile. We originally had about 600 people. I was reporting directly to the CIO, and we called it Enterprise Quality Management because TCOE kind of has a bad rap. A lot of the outsourcers have created, and some of them are real good, especially the ones in the room, a lot of them have created testing centers of mediocrity using industry worst practices, and in that case, the meaning of a TCOE is gone. But the stats are there. In my garage, and I'll just tell one more story before we get into the mobile, I have 3 cars, and I mention that because it represents the 2 trends. On one side of the car, on one side of the driveway, we have a Leaf, okay, which is an electric car, right? I just couldn't turn it down. It's so with the tax returns and so forth, that's a trend. So there's a trend towards electric cars, and there's been a trend for several years. And probably somebody was saying, by 2014, there would be no more gas cars, but that's not happening. Because there's this other trend. This other trend is the minivan, the large SUV, and now they're kind of blending and so forth. So I do think there's going to be TCOEs. I do think there will be QA leaders. I actually think there are going to be more, one of my titles, which is Chief Quality Officer. Because as we're moving to the cloud, as we are integrating things like Salesforce.com or big enterprise systems, somebody needs to do that independent verification and validation. Now, with that being said, Joe, I do believe in DevOps. I think that it's more than a buzzword and all that. Okay, but back to mobile, and we can have our discussion in the question and answer period. In terms of mobile. And I'll give you my Al Gore moment here, and none of you will believe me. But my Al Gore moment is I had the opportunity at T-Mobile. Most people don't know this, but when the very first Android phone was rolled out on the T-Mobile network. I don't know if you guys know that. It was called the G1. All right. At the time, it was a dark project. It was called Gila. And we were working with Google, and we're like, how the heck do we test this thing? And by the way, the thing sucked. Every 60 minutes you had to have to reboot and so forth. And it didn't have any apps. And we had the My Faves, and we had My Account. And it was just us and some engineers from Google trying to figure this thing out. And we tested, this is my Al Gore moment, is we're like, okay, we turn on the network, it's launch day. Here's the first G1 in the T-Mobile office. Okay, let's make a call. Let's check it. Let's check that it was provisioned correctly. Let's check that the billing happened correctly, and so forth. Now, the point of that is that there's so many things that go through this. Now, before that, and the point of that is that we tested the first G1 in production at T-Mobile, and it happened to be in my office. But before that, there was about 6 months of testing related to the RF signals. Can you hear me now? And there's some YouTube videos, if you want to look it up on T-Mobile's testing, where, I don't know if you guys are James Bond fans, anybody? Yeah, so in Seattle, there was another group of testers that was the engineering testers, and they had a lab where you had to wear booties, and you had to wear a white lab coat, and all this, and they had copper boxes where you could test RF signals. They had, you know, things where it dropped the phone. When they did automated testing, they actually had a robot that would do like this, or they had a tumbler that would drop it, you know, 10,000 times and see how it reacted, and then the different vendors would come in and test. So there are different types of mobile testing, and from my perspective, mobile testing is a target-rich environment. Not only the RF side, and there's, you know, from that time where the G1 used to crash every 90 minutes or so, to now when everybody is in a football stadium or at their kid's soccer game or whatever, taking pictures and movies, it is just ubiquitous, okay? But there's all kinds of things that can go wrong, from, you know, something as similar as cosmetic issues to device incompatibility. OS issues cause a lot of heartburn. Recently I got the, iPhone 6. And, you know, some apps that I was using before didn't work. I had to then wait a couple of days and get the upgrade, okay? And there's a lot of people like us sitting in and making sure that those things work. Another kind of another area that's a little bit ignored by some groups is the network issues. Traveling around the world recently, earlier this year, I was in South Africa, and I had, you know, every once in a while my phone would drop, and, you know, we were talking to some of the carriers over in South Africa, and they said, yeah, you know, out in the country, this would happen quite a bit. And if we could test with the different network conditions, that would be really helpful. So HP, I don't want to get into too much of a sales thing here, but HP did buy a company called Shunra that helps you emulate the different network conditions, and I'm sure some of the other tools do. But as far as I know, that's the only one that does the really top network emulation. But at T-Mobile, we actually had a copper box, and we had people wearing gloves, you know, switching between 2G and 3G at the time, and 4G, etc. And then there's security issues and so forth. HP asked me to do this, so I will mention that HP does have application security testing for the phones, like Fortify on demand and so forth. This is a journey, you know, and you have to think about the whole life cycle, as Joe mentioned. One of the things is writing for multi-device, you know, whether you use a platform. There are a lot of tools that require different services from the phones, and those are different per device. You got to keep aware of that. When I was at T-Mobile, and they didn't have testers at that time for Android, and at the time we didn't have iPhone. We had Blackberries and Windows as well. We hired technical testers, pretty much people with Java skills. Okay. And we did use some emulation at first, and then we bought, I think, one of each. We bought Device Anywhere. We bought a big Perfecto rack to put in our lab. We bought several $1 million of, you know, network stuff. We even looked at Dan's stuff, but it wasn't ready yet. At the time I was there, I would have bought it afterwards. And then since then, other vendors have come out. Even HP has a mobile center that was recently released that goes along with your quality center and ALM. We talked about security. I do recommend a more technical tester for mobile testing. I will say that. We did try out the crowdsourced testing. I think that's the next slide. Okay, yeah. We used emulators for sure. We tested on devices. We actually let the employees, we gave the phones ahead of launch sometimes, or, you know, we let them report bugs. We tried U-Test, which is now Applause. They found a lot of cosmetic errors. You know, I actually, as the leader of QA, decided to kind of check it out. So I went on, and at the time, this is many years ago, I had a BlackBerry. And I actually found 3 bugs in a few minutes and in 20 minutes, and made like $40 into my PayPal account. So if you guys have free time, you can try the crowdsourced testing. It can be effective, but I wouldn't have it as your only source of testing. It's really good for testing in the wild, if you will, or in production. So kind of the odd corner case. Can be found with crowdsourced testing. And then cloud. Dan will tell you about that. Now, either you can use companies who provide a public cloud and you can rent that space, or you can have a private cloud like Dan will tell you about, and HP has one too, and HP partners with Mobile Labs as well. But the devices are very important. Okay. And I guess we'll wait for questions at the end? Okay. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Dan McFall, who's Vice President of Sales. And we've run into each other in Europe in the airport, right?
And you were headed to Australia to one of our customers.
Yeah, and met with one of your customers in Australia who was very happy with their tool. Yeah.
So the fun part is the sales guy will be the briefest. I was coached that the sales guy shouldn't talk too much. So just quick on my background, because the question was asked, my opinion on processes and things of that nature. So interesting enough, my QA background is a little bit different in that I came into it when I came to Mobile Labs. But my background before that, which relates very well to software development, was I spent 15 years in logistics and supply chain optimization. So I actually worked for a company that put every Coca-Cola delivery truck in the world on the road every single day, running optimization, all the Walmart grocery delivery trucks, every truck that left Procter & Gamble loaded with dog food, shampoo, everything else. And what's interesting about that, so I'm going to use that to segue for just half a second into the question that was asked. So when we would bring optimization to bear for people that had manual routers, so think about somebody who builds a route plan like a manual tester or anything else along those lines. And the fear always was, I'm going to bring this, let's use automation solution to bear. Well, is this thing a threat to my job? And what I would always say was no. If you're not any good at your job, it's a threat to your job, and we probably should have gotten rid of you in the first place. What it's going to do is make you better at your job. And the reason it's going to make you better at your job is it's going to take the easy blocking and tackling off the table. And what I mean by that is, when we talk about mobile, and I'm getting ready to show you some stats on devices, your does my login button test, what happens if I put the wrong username in, what happens, what screen do I get? You might have run that on a website, let's say different browsers, different computer formats. You might run that test 30 times, and maybe somewhere in there's not a break-even point on optimization, or on automation. In mobile, you're probably going to run that test to get the coverage you need 400 to 500 times. So it's about freeing up the people in this room to work on the things that matter. And James wasn't here from IHG, and he gave me a great story about exploratory testing in the first 3 months that I had this job, which was she's looking at an iPad for an app that they have sitting on a desk, and she goes, what happens if I spin that iPad around? And the reason is because the app detected accelerometer events. And that made a Stack Overflow and the whole app crash. Well, who in the hell is going to spin an iPad around? Nobody. But she worked on the 20th floor of a building. So what happens if I left the app up, I forgot to close my laptop down, or my iPad down, I put it in my book bag, and I walk down 20 flights of stairs with the iPad jostling in my book bag as I come down the step? That also creates a Stack Overflow and causes the app to crash and a whole bunch of other issues. So what automation does, what we're going to do with DevOps, is we automate all kinds of other things, is we've got to free up people's times to discover things like that. Not the stuff that, frankly, the developer should have discovered in the first place, which is, I don't have null handling in some kind of edit box. Or I forgot to clear out the cache, so if I tried to paste something and it's not text, it's something else I copied and pasted into that. That's the stuff the developer should have caught. So what you guys, in my opinion, are going to do in the future is help design those test cases. And maybe there's not a separated QA team, but that's just titles. I think what's really going to happen is going to be the integration, the complete communication, as we see with that social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, in terms of creating new job structures that are more collaborative. I'm like the baby here, so I'm all pie in the sky and stuff like that. But I think that's what we're going to see. So now I'll move into why we care about device access management in mobile. This is probably old. There are 2,500 different device models in the world. There are 106 valid operating system versions in the world. A lot of people don't know this. Mike would know this. The carriers put their own image on the device, so frankly, a Verizon iPhone is slightly different than an AT&T iPhone, is slightly different than a T-Mobile iPhone, and those things can have bugs in them. So what that creates is over 100 million different possible permutations that you need to think about when you go to testing. And I'm not going to say you got to test all of these, because I think the 80-20 rule more than qualifies in mobile, especially at the enterprise. You talk to Delta here in town, a overwhelming % of their web traffic from mobile comes off of iOS devices. It's business travelers. It's typically higher end devices. You go into emerging markets, you're going to see Android numbers go through the roof for that same type of thing. And it's still going to be a limited number of devices depending upon the market that you're in. But you can see, huge problem. Huge problem. Surrounded by other things that we're talking about. So I have all those device types. I have all those operating system versions that I need to track. Those OS upgrades come out nonstop. And hey, unlike we had when we were thinking about going from Windows XP to 7, you don't have any control over it because the users are going to do it in the first place. Maybe if you're enterprise, you can have AirWatch or Mobile Iron or somebody like that prevent it. But if you're doing user-based apps, they're not waiting to ask you. So you got to be ready. So a lot of people that we worked with, iOS 7 was a debacle for them. They were not ready for it. They were not ready for the adoption of it. They were all prepared for iOS 8 after what happened. Same thing now with Lollipop. You're going to see with that, the other new versions of Android. You have to be in front of these things because you don't want to crowdsource your testing with your actual customers. And that's what a lot of people do. So you have that. I have all those devices I need, but the world is flat now. We offshore, we have distributed teams, we have campuses. You know, we're over here by Cox Communications. You got Mannheim, you got Auto Trader over there. You got people spread throughout. You got people on the first floor and people on the 10th floor, and they all need access to those devices. So if you're going to buy one for everybody, that gets really expensive really quickly. And going back to my background, it introduces inefficiency. Because what if somebody has the device in hand on a Friday, they're doing a test, they go to leave, they're going to lock it in their drawer, they're going to come back on Monday, their kids get sick, they get sick, no one else has access to that. And these are the most unique computers you have because unlike everything else you do in the cloud, you're not going to create 20,000 of them instantaneously in the Amazon Web Services or in somebody else's cloud. You've got to have the physical device. So that's the thing that slows you down. That's what creates inefficiency. You release too soon, you release applications with poor quality. And this is what we find out from our customers, right? The problem with mobile testing starts with the device itself. We have really gone back to kind of a client-server model from what the internet gave us, which was a kind of shared services model, right? We got so used to testing web applications, being able to go out into public facilities, spin up VMs, get whatever we need, that we kind of took for granted, oh, I have this single point of failure now, or I have this single point of access. And without the control to access those, that's what's going to slow you down. That's what's going to create quality issues for you. And then I got my one plug. Why do we think you should do it on premise? Why do we think your devices should stay behind your firewall? What do you need to contemplate? Well, we do a lot with banks. We do a lot with healthcare companies. We do a lot with media companies. And the applications themselves are competitive advantages because, especially in banking, there are a lot of people who will state they will move banks now in that desired 18 to 36 category. They will move for a better mobile banking experience, so your app's a competitive advantage. So do you want somebody else to see the first version of your app by putting it off-site, re-releasing it in the public cloud? What data do you use? We have another partner. They had a guy get kicked off a project at a bank. He wasn't even thinking. He just emailed himself some test data from his @bankyouallknow.com address to his @partner.com. It had about 1,000 credit card numbers in it. He got fired within 15 minutes. So when you start thinking about where that test data goes and all of those types of things, and there's an endpoint here. It's not a VM that spins up for a second and disappears after you're done with it. It's all still there. The data's still resident on it. Do you want to risk that security breach leaving all of that out there? What if it's a mobile website and all you have to do is leave Safari? Do you remember to shut it down? Did they clear the cache? Just too much human error, too much risk that you're introducing in by using a public cloud, in our opinion. So we think you need to be able to share devices, but you think you need to be able to keep it behind the firewall. It fits a lot of different ways for different businesses, and that'll be the end of the commercial. So that's what we do, but what we also think, and the thing I want to point out on this slide, this is our product, but really what I want to talk about is you want a solution that's going to give you 24/7 access to devices. I do that. There's other people that do that. I recommend you go look at a lot of them. It's a growing market. You need to be able to access them from off-site. But what I think as you go through a maturity model, you need to think about how you access devices fitting into both how you test today, whether it's manual or automated, and the fact that with this explosion of Agile, there is not as large of an overarching IT strategy organizationally around product sets. You're not with HP anymore, so I can say that. So you're going to find lots of groups out here. So this team over here might be developing things in something like PhoneGap, and they like open source solutions. So they're using PhoneGap, they're using Selenium, or they're using Calabash. They're doing all of those types of things. You've acquired a whole other company that's a former IBM shop. They've all kept all their IBM. They're doing that. You've got some new groups who've come in and they like SmartBear, or they like Tricentis, or they like all these new tools, SOSTA. Anybody who's come in, what I think is, though, all of those groups have a device access problem. The mobile device is now the new infrastructure core of your technology challenges. And how do you bring that in as infrastructure like anything else is a big problem that we're going to have as we go forward. Mobile DevOps is very challenging. So just think about, when you look into the space, think about how you're going to bring the device to bear, both for dev activities, for test activities, and then for deployment activities carrying over out of that. And that's going to be where the efficiencies come. And I think titles and whatever else won't really matter, but there will be a lot of testing. There's going to be a lot of testing going on in that for a long time. And it's going to involve mobile devices, which is the problem we try to solve. Try to be brief.
Great.
Sit in between you two.
We're partners.
I will say, I think Dan put it very eloquently. I think he expressed it very well in that, I wasn't trying to imply there wouldn't be testing, even though I was teasing Mike a little bit as well. But it will be different, right? That's the point. It will be different. We'll have to think about where people fit and try and put things together.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I wanted to open it up to the floor now and any questions from the audience to drive this panel.
I have a question. How many people are doing mobile testing? Okay.
That's a good one, yeah.
How many people are struggling with it?
No questions?
I'll ask a question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm currently been asked, I just started doing mobile testing. It's for a customized version of Salesforce.com.
Oh, great.
So do you have any advice for me? Because it's not really mobile as a whole, really it's just that app. I would love to hear your feedback on tips, tricks, something I need to be looking at that I may not be thinking of. I know we do single sign-on and that's been verified. And I've made a list of recommendations for them of what I see just as a user point of view. But I don't have, I would love some direction on that because our group doesn't do mobile testing normally.
So in terms of Salesforce, it's a unique question. I've done a lot of work around this. And there are several types of tools you can use. You could use some of your traditional HP tools, and there's some accelerators. There's one called Arcsona you might want to look into. But in this case, when you're talking about Mobile One with Salesforce, I would look into something like a SureClick, which is on the Salesforce portal, and you can and it's built on the Force platform, and it allows you to actually do testing at unit testing level, at the QA and system testing level, and actually generates Apex code, which is Salesforce code, and allows you to do your security testing, which is probably the configuration security testing between Salesforce orgs, and I know we're getting a little technical here, is the biggest problem, because each time you migrate between orgs, you have to basically do the configuration for the security by hand, and it's very error prone. So something like this is a good one, and happy to help you with that. If you want to talk about one, I can give you some more answers on that.
So, you guys seeing any kind of a framework that would solve the problem of that, the active being required, i.e. virtualizing the handset for testing, as opposed to having to issue physical devices to everybody?
Yes and no. And why I mean yes and no. So, I mean, if you look at me, and I'll name competitors here because I think people should know. I mean, I think there's us, there's Perfecto Mobile, there's Device Anywhere, who he mentioned. Xamarin's come out with a test cloud of their own. These give you access to virtualized devices, but we're all in a nascent space. And what I mean by that is we don't solve some of the other problems you have. So I'll give you the ability to see a remote screen on a device. You can remote control it. It's a lot like device in hand. But here's what if I need to take a picture of something? Well, it's either sitting in a server rack somewhere. Mine's sitting in a physical cart somewhere pointing at the side, so you lose that. That device is physically in one place. If you need to do GPS testing, if you're going to wander around, what do you need to do with that? So do you need to talk to the device? Do you need to hear the device? All of us are at different levels of maturity on those things. So we solve some problems with that, all of us, but there's still a lot to take off. I think the most interesting space potentially is what happens, does someone ever finally figure out real, true virtualization for mobile devices? Now, what's challenging when you look at things like emulators is emulators don't have batteries. Right. Emulators are running computer processors, not mobile processors. Emulators don't have cameras or GPSs even in them. And that's the biggest thing that messes all of that up, or a network connection. And what I mean by that is a cellular network connection, the ability to have data. So we're all moving towards that at different speeds and different ways. But I think that's where the market's going, will be true virtualization, down to the point that even if it's still a single point device, it's a one-to-one relationship. Everything you could do on that device, you could fake out like you would any other device, testing device, and then you'll be able to carry that forward and it really kind of accelerate having a small pool of them that you can share for a pretty large group of people.
So what you're saying is there's an opportunity for compartmentalization around the things that can be virtualized effectively, but there's still going to remain a need for really the hardware testing of the device itself, which is separate from the functionality delivered in those parts of the device that are virtualizable.
I think yes. I think the challenge is that what we've seen with mobile applications is that they are very, very dependent on physical hardware. And what I can mean by that is you can find bugs in, say, iOS 8 that only exist on a 5S, not a 6, because there are firmware differences that are creating issues that exist. Or Citi got hit years ago because they had a double payment problem when you schedule something in a mobile application. Well, that double payment problem only occurred if you were on a Canadian network with a US-based phone. So these are the things that make mobile kind of uniquely challenging, and why device access and physical devices matters.
And I think there's enough differences in the OS versions, right, across all these various platforms, like Dan said, that the emulators are too generic, right? You can get basic app operation. You can check to make sure your app works through the controls that you've built, but you don't get the phone environment around, which in a mobile environment is much more significant. In a PC world, we let Windows do most of that, right? We're letting the OS take care of all that, and it's pretty, it's been around for so long that it's fairly bulletproof, but the mobile operating systems are so new, relatively speaking, right, that we don't have that. So the emulators can't get quite enough. The other point I wanted to make to Dan's comment is,
I think that's another reason, all the things he talked about is another reason that people are kind of going away from the cloud. There was this huge influx several years ago for cloud vendors. Device Anywhere kind of created that space, and they created a demand that people ran toward. And what they found then is they can't do things like bank by check and bank by picture, and stuff like that. And so what people end up doing is doing a lot of stuff in-house with, and I'll use Dan's equipment as an example because I think it's an excellent example, where the devices are shareable internally, but yet you can still walk over and unplug them and use them for handheld tests, and then plug them right back in when you're finished, so that you can multi-operate that device. You can use it as a shared device or as an in-hand device as well. That's kind of why I think I see the cloud vendors are having a little bit of trouble with that. You'll even see Perfecto Mobile is another partner that we work with. They're shifting in a way from a traditional cloud vendor to be more on site as well for those same kind of reasons.
Let me follow up there, kind of a different direction of virtualization, if you will. You mentioned a problem in the course of the discussion. I think Oliver kind of touched on it, is the data security issue with mobile testing in particular, and the ease of loss of data through even the innocent example, I think, Dan, that you provided, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just sent it to myself because I thought it would be easier. Oh crap, and so there's a guy named Simon Crosby that I had the pleasure of meeting a couple months back. He's the original inventor of the Zen virtualization schema, and Simon has a new company now called Bromium that essentially wraps every transaction on the interweb with its own little micro virtual machine. So if you think of it as putting a bubble wrap around your transaction and then being able to do what he calls a live action virtual analysis. So he's able to essentially scrape off that whole virtual machine, a micro virtual machine, and analyze all of the steps that happen if a bad guy gets into your interaction. I would think that in mobile testing, you would want to have something like that in your test environment in order to not only protect yourself from the inadvertent data loss problem, but also to be able to conduct a more solid analysis of what we're actually seeing in the test conditions.
Yeah, well, by the way, your phone company knows a lot more about you than you think they do. I mean, they know it.
Say that again, Michael?
Your phone company knows a lot more about you than you might think that they do, and they can tell where you are at most times of the day.
So
they can, all that.
I was on a panel not too long ago with a bunch of guys from the payment industry,
Right.
and they're from the biggest payment companies in the world. They basically said we should all presume that there is no privacy.
Exactly, I would agree with that.
So I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot of information about where you are, who you're calling, what you're spending, who you're emailing, available, and there's a lot of analytics going on. In terms of testing, that's an interesting one. I don't know where to go with that Bromium thing. I mean, I think that the data is already so rich. I mean, that's why Joe mentioned that the guy got caught in 15 minutes. I remember when I worked at Equifax many years ago, I went into a room that I wasn't at that time authorized to go into, and my boss called me and said, why are you down in the data center? And I was like, what? I just closed the door, taking a tour. So I think there's a lot of data out there. In terms of network, the network isn't always available, especially if you're doing the offshore testing. So network emulation is a big thing. Sometimes the other thing none of us really talked about was the performance testing.
Yeah.
A lot of the traditional tools are now including performance testing. Even LoadRunner can plug into an Android phone, for example, and get that message level data. And when you have that level data, you can do a lot with it, from ramping up and seeing the impact not only on the phone but on the back end, which is the important thing. In terms of security, I mean, we ran into some wild things at T-Mobile. We partnered with a company called Danger, which was, I guess, it proved to be true. It was a company owned by Microsoft. And at the time, one of the most popular phones around was the Sidekick. You guys remember the Sidekick? And two things happened. One is somebody hacked Paris Hilton's phone, which was on the T-Mobile network at that time, mainly through social engineering. And the other thing that happened was Microsoft, through Danger's, we used to store the people's photos on Danger's network, or on their devices, and like all of them crashed at one time. So everybody at a Sidekick lost all their photos. We paid everybody $100 and gave them a credit towards a new phone, and you never hear about the Sidekick anymore. We tried one time to put out an Android Sidekick, but Sidekick was so popular that somebody had a tattoo of a Sidekick on their neck, if you could believe that. Yeah, they loved it so much, but the phone just died because of that, and people don't remember that stuff. But and the reason why I tell that story is because it is one of these security issues that can come up, and when you lose people's photos, and we eventually got them back, but people get pissed, and it wasn't even our fault. I mean, and that's a point, is sometimes you're dependent on third parties, and you got to test those things as well.
Yep.
Sir?
So I'm curious what your guys' thoughts and strategies toward network testing is, even outside of the cellular space. One of our biggest challenges, having a data-heavy interactive app, is you get people in hotels that have different types of Wi-Fi with different firewall rules and security, and it doesn't matter why your app may not connect or why you can't get a WebSocket connection, your app is broken.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge problem. I think Mike even touched on that at the beginning. There's network virtualization is probably the only answer, I think, to that question. The question was about, I don't know if you guys could all hear it, but it was about testing against various network throughput rates and jitter rates and stuff like that. A lot of the hardware vendors will tell you, well, we'll put multiple physical devices in different locations, but you could never predict where all of your users are going to be. And there's no way you could afford the equipment to test in all of the physical locations anyway. So that's where network virtualization comes in, and there's tools like the one I'm most familiar with is Shunra, which is now HPNV. And that's it's a piece of software that sits between your app and the application server, and changes, it basically slows down, in a way, the transaction going from the app. So you run everything on Wi-Fi in your office, so it's all nice and secure, but you can vary then the throughput rates to match exactly what your end user rates are going to be, and you can even vary that in transaction. So I did a test once where we simulated a person, sitting at their desk, then picking their tablet up out of the cradle, going onto a Wi-Fi signal, then they walk into the elevator and it drops down to 2 bars, and then so you can simulate those kinds of conditions to see how the app would respond. And that's about the only way, I think, to realistically test in varying network conditions. And almost every customer I work with ends up having at least 3 or 4 versions of every test. They run the same test, same exact test, on the exact same hardware, operating system version, everything, and then run it on Wi-Fi, standard 3G, standard 4G, 4G LTE speeds, etc. And again, usually this is either through virtualization or just by turning options on and off on the phone itself between runs, just in order to get not only functional statistics, but also, of course, user experience statistics as well, performance statistics that Mike alluded to. Yep.
I'll add on to that, actually, from the other side of performance testing. So we're talking about in-app mobile, but if anybody here does back-end testing, does server testing, is in the performance space, do not underestimate the amount of load that mobile devices create on your servers.
That's true.
Actually, he works for HP now. So we all know people from Shunra because we're all in the same ecosystem, but it's a really great story. One of the guys there who was kind of their evangelist tells a story about the first mobile app they ever released at ING. And they put 20% of their customer base on it, and he brought down an entire data center, and not a test data center, a real data center, CIO's phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning type event. They even showed they took Load Runner, did something where they added 50 phones. So they got 5,000 virtual users who are coming in off the desktops, hitting a backend server, add 50 virtualized phones. Now you see a spike. The dwell time, the concurrency, all of those types of things are very, very different in mobile. And I'll use that to kind of segue something here, which is don't think about just mobile. Here I am, I'm the guy giving you device access, but we had a Salesforce question. So are the API calls correct in that? Is the data flowing into the back-end systems correctly in that? So if you're doing banking applications, does the user get the same experience on your website when he starts his transaction there? Does it show up in his mobile application? And by golly, does it show up in your back-end system where you're doing the actual credit processing? So when you start thinking about your strategies, don't lose end to end. You know, as we're in the enterprise, you've got to track all that stuff all the way through. You could have a perfectly functioning mobile application that all the buttons click, nothing crashes, this response time is great, but if you have like what happened with the Weather Channel recently, which was the right city with the wrong weather, because the API call was wrong, that's an issue. So you've got to think about how you validate all of those things, and network goes into that. That's what makes mobile exciting. You got to add all of this type of stuff together.
There are also, I mean, at T-Mobile we also had, there are hardware-based solutions as well, I mean, for network. And I'm a big fan of HPNV or Sunra, but I mean, there are other ones like Spirent, which is more of a hardware-based type of solution. You know, it's important to do also some like fault injection, like, you know, think of these test cases where, like you said, you switch from one network to another. I actually remember a real life example where I was talking with the CIO at T-Mobile. He called me, and I was pacing in my driveway, and the phone dropped about 6 times. And this is an Israeli guy at the time, Orasi Yarkoni, and he just started yelling at me. He's like, "You need to call engineering, find out why the phone is dropping, and so forth. You know, this just sucks. You know." And because, you know, obviously using a T-Mobile phone. So I called, and the answer was that at the time, and hopefully this is fixed, you cannot, if you start the phone on Wi-Fi, which T-Mobile had a special kind of Wi-Fi, and did Wi-Fi calling, you couldn't switch to 4G at the time. The technology didn't exist. And he's like, just a limitation. And I was like, really? Yeah. And I explained it, and then, you know, I had a couple meetings, and that was it. But I mean, sometimes there are limitations like that, and you just need to know it. But you know, look into network virtualization is probably the best way to deal with that.
You know, one of our hardest problems with that is just figuring out what the rules are for the scenarios where users are most commonly at, because each one is a unique jewel, right?
Yeah, and you know, the key to that, and we didn't really talk about it, is network log. I mean, the logs on the back end, you can actually see what's happening. And we had an advantage as a mobile company, is we had, you know, records of everything, right? And the phones would actually report back what was going on. So we had, you know, hundreds of thousands of drones basically reporting back all the issues.
But your ISPs can get you a lot of that data, right? I mean, you can talk to your ISP.
True.
A lot of people don't realize this. You can go to your ISP, your company's ISP, and they can tell you what model devices are hitting your websites, right? They can tell you what operating system versions each one of those phones had, you know, what kind of connection they were on. So you can get that statistic right out of the data you already have. You don't have to do anything extra.
Even what site they looked at before they looked at yours or after, or whatever.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
You know, the question that we usually get on these panels is, how do you pick, if you could only have 5 devices or 10 devices, you know, how do you pick them? And I think Joe alluded to that answer too. Is there are lists on the web, and you can get it from ISP who's hitting your site, but also just what's most popular that month, and it changes regularly.
So that's how to, you know, take a look at your network speeds. You know, and like Shunra has a cool feature where it'll actually record speeds at your location. So you can go to the customer location and you can record exactly what kind of connection they have there just by running this little app that runs on the phone. So if you do have, you know, known warehouses where the mobile app is going to be used or something like that, you can actually record real life conditions too that way.
Yeah, and there's some other tools out there as well, like Omniture. I don't know if you all, any of you
I
haven't used that one.
since they're my
Experience.
sponsors, Parasoft apparently is going to be releasing a network virtualization.
Are they? Okay, that'll be interesting. Didn't know that.
What is the best automation solution you guys have come across? The context here is that you have devices and you have the apps, and they are supposed to look and feel a certain way on the screen. So which primarily becomes most of the time a manual type of the activity, and that becomes a very cumbersome activity when you are dealing with a lot of apps, a lot of devices. Have you encountered, or what is the best automation solution?
The vendor is going to bow out of this question because I have no credibility. So I'll let the other guys answer.
When you say automation solution, what you mean, like a scripting environment, or are you talking about
It's like, when you
execution?
take a device and you have like certain apps and all, they're supposed to look and feel a certain way. Like, your screen, your icons, which pretty much becomes a manual thing that you see, okay, it's looking fine on a device. So it just adds up as more application, more devices are there. So is there a good automation solution that you guys have come across?
So if I heard the question correctly, you're asking about like look and feel type testing, right? Where I want to make sure that the screen comes up properly on an iPhone versus an iPad, where the orientation might be different or scaling might be different, that kind of stuff. Is that what you mean? I got you.
So maybe the way, Dan, you can answer it is it different technologies that are used, either the pixel-based, there's different ways.
Yeah.
So some automation tools look at it from an object level, and then others will actually look at it from what they see on the screen, right? And there's some logic around that. And that's your expertise, yeah.
I mean, the problem with look and feel testing, right, is the object identification won't work, right? Because you might have the string stored in memory properly, but it's getting truncated on the iPhone, right? So you can't rely on those object properties necessarily. And so that's where, like you say, Mike, we got to do pixel comparison. But that's really tough when you're trying to do scaling between different size phones. And
The best thing
Yeah,
that
there's
we
not
have
many
come across
tools.
is kind of like clicking the pictures with the automated cameras and comparing the two. But I was just wondering if you guys had a different experience and you saw something.
I will tell a story from a prospective customer, actually. For what you're specifically saying, the guys at Xamarin apparently do a nice job with that. In doing, because it's a cross-platform tool, right? So Xamarin, if people are not familiar with that, Xamarin is what you would call a mobile application development platform, right? So you're supposed to, in their specialties, .NET coders can release iOS applications and Android applications. It's really popular. So they went out and actually purchased Calabash, which is a mobile automation framework. Fits kind of in, think of it like Selenium, where Selenium does for web, Calabash does for mobile. The lack is it only does mobile. They bought that, they rolled that in, and I think their strength apparently has become screen comparison. They'll do some nice stuff. It'll run across like 60 phones and tell you where maybe your app looks a little bit different. What I would say is with well-designed test cases in a lot of different automation environments, you should be able to do similar things. So what Mike was talking about, what they were looking to, so there's object level testing, there's surface level testing, and really what everybody's done with that is become hybrid level testing, which is you take the ability to do both. So I might be looking for that edit box on the screen that has certain text in it, but I'm also going to swipe the screen and validate it that it looks the way I expected. Or I have an anticipated location on the screen that was set up in the object, maybe XY coordinate based, but I'll pull at runtime where it really is on the screen and I can do that. You are reliant on the automation engineer or the test case designer to come up and create those test cases, and you have to build it together. I don't know if, and I don't work with Xamarin, I don't know if they do some of that for you, but if that's something you're interested in, it might be something worth looking at. And what we have is actually, we have customers that use both of us because they like the ability to go through and do that screen comparison piece, because it's, your loyalty application for a hotel or an airline or something like that, and it's a wide variety of devices, and they want to make sure that they're not, forgetting the guys, running, maybe a mid-tier Android device or something like that, and they don't realize it looks screwy on that. But it is a challenge because they have different GPUs. We just had this, the iPhone 6 Plus is actually, people don't know this, they're using software to throttle back the resolution that you're experiencing on the device. The GPU and the screen on the device is capable of a higher resolution picture than the one that you're getting.
So when we virtualized that the first time, the screen was completely screwed up because we weren't anticipating what was getting sent into the frame buffer. So it really can vary a lot by device. So I understand the challenge, but it's challenging for all of us. That's part of the fun part for mobile.
Yeah, from a perspective of mobile labs, I mean, I visited a lot of customers that use a lot of different tools, and I've never heard anybody say, we bought it and it sucks and we didn't use it. So, from that perspective, it's that's you know, I'm a pretty tough critic, and that's a pretty good endorsement, right? Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So my company has a mobile site, but it's small in comparison to a lot of the other things that you see. It's just a shop site. It's where our consumers go and browse. Earlier today, my CIO handed me his old iPhone and said, here, you can put this on the Wi-Fi, and that's what you can use to test with. No data, no nothing.
Good luck with that, yeah.
What would be my best point of argument against having data? Because I feel like I should have it, but I don't know the best argument to articulate to him as to why I would need data.
You mean cellular data, right?
Business case for...
Well, I mean, there's functional and performance implications to the network speeds. The actual network speed can affect functionality because you may come across like timeouts that are different by carrier that would actually cause your app to fail even though it works fine on Wi-Fi. Now, having said that, that's a minority point, right? Most of the time, if your app works, it's going to work on any speed unless there's some timeout threshold you're going to hit. So that's really not a big argument for that. Really, the data is primarily around testing user experience on the phone. How long does it take for me to get my transaction completed, get the result I expect? And then also, as Dan pointed out, load on the back end, because that can make a big difference. If I have 20 phones, on the back end, it can actually be presenting a load similar to 200 users on a PC, because the phone, the delays cause extra resources to be consumed for a longer period of time, and they chew up more server resources for a much longer period of time, which looks to the app like a lot more users in a highly scalable IP type environment. So really, the need for data is primarily around those two things: user experience on the phone and back-end impact. That's the business reasons that you'd want to do network testing.
Well, one sales guy can ask a salesy guy type question. Does your site generate revenue?
Not in the sense that a consumer can purchase.
Okay.
It does generate revenue in the sense that we do advertise,
Mm-hmm.
and our consumers will pre-shop online. We sell furniture. So
Okay.
not a whole lot of people will
So if they can't get the pictures to load because they're on an edge network someplace and they get bored and they leave and they forget to come back to it, there is a distinct impact to bottom line, not including the fun things like brand impact and all of that type of stuff. So you're in a competitive space. Mobile devices are mobile. I tease my wife because she sits and she won't stand up, and I go, that is a mobile phone. You can do that in the car while we're driving to where we're headed. But the fact of the matter is you don't have control over when the user's going to try to do those things, right? I think the ideal is, in fact, they most likely won't be on Wi-Fi. Because if I think about a time where I might be doing mobile shopping or something like that, especially if it's pre-buying, might be my MARTA trip. It might be while I'm sitting at the airport. It might be sitting on the airplane before I go. All kinds of places where your network connection is not necessarily guaranteed to be real high speed are very good. So you'll want to, that's probably your push, right? And it was go back to Costa's. Costa's excellent, the 1 second, the $1 billion second, right? That's what you're talking about. I'm sure it's not quite that big, but there's a relative number to that. Who leaves? Look at your bounce rates for the mobile people coming into that website. You'll be able to pull that type of information. Who leaves after looking at less than one page? Who leaves after less than a second? What happens with the transactions? You probably can pull that, and if you see it pretty high, it's going to be relative to the user experience.
And we could help you get an Android phone and a Windows phone as well. Yeah, I think you definitely need that. Exactly. Yeah.
The nice thing about actually that is you could get, when you're talking about that type of stuff, when it's mobile web, there's a plethora of low-end, really cheap Android devices that are still an Android device that you can have a small amount of cell signal for and put something together with that.
Yeah, maybe you can get a prepaid phone. It's one option. I'm serious. I mean, it's the same, just put a prepaid SIM in there, see how much you actually use it, and then you're not signed up for a 2-year contract. Not that anybody does that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's probably only, 25%, say, of transactions that you'd really need to measure that data rate. 75% of your testing is just functionality testing that doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether it's Wi-Fi or not. So, I mean, it's a small percentage anyway. It's not like you're missing the boat completely, right? So.
You guys spoke to the number of permutations are in regards to mobile and OS and browsers and devices, but can you speak to your experience in seeing efficiencies or the inefficiencies of mobile? Like performing a test on a mobile device, even if you have the cart and it's all sitting there, right? Because it's a different device, because you're not as familiar with it as you might be your PC. Do you guys have any stats or anything you can share in regards to efficiencies or inefficiencies of testing in mobile relative to traditional PC testing?
Efficiencies of the people, you mean, the testers themselves?
Well, I mean, maybe the people in their domain, but just, in my experience, when you're testing on a mobile app and you have to document what might be an issue or what's occurring, and you screenshot, or you double click the photo and you got to email it to yourself, and then you send that and you attach that to the bug, right? There's steps involved in a mobile test that, in a lot of ways, just either from being familiar with that device or how it works or how you navigate it or how you download the apps to it, and et cetera, that in my mind are a little bit more complex than just your traditional PC-based tests. I didn't know if you guys had any stats in regards to, what does it mean to test on mobile, the same cases relative to PC?
We certainly have a lot of stats. It's an interesting question because it implies that you're doing a lot of manual testing, whereas some of the screenshots and stuff certainly can be done in an automated fashion if you have that skill set in-house. And some of the tools will help you do that. Let me think about that. The other thing is the expectations are slightly different too. That at T-Mobile, for example, when we did a billing release, we did for a year. We did 2 mobile releases a day, right, or 2 content releases a day. So we didn't have time for that full regression test every time. So we had to use the automation. I would. It's interesting. I'm kind of curious what tool set you are using for your manual testing, because there may be some things that can even help you on the manual side.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, so I actually worked on a project where we measured manual testing holding a device in your hand versus using remote control tools to do your manual testing.
Right.
Again, leveraging a full-size keyboard, your desktop to do screenshots, video, and with that comparison, we were able to increase testing 45%. So that's just one data point, but it's just to show you, just dealing with manual testing, by leveraging some tools, you can gain some of those efficiencies.
And I'll add, one of the biggest challenges we actually see is preparing the device for test. So Apple nor Google did anybody any favors around how to push builds down to devices in a really clean way. We were talking to one of our customers who was trying to take a screenshot on an Android device, and he finally I think he took a picture of it with his iPhone. That was how he took a screenshot of his Android device. But those are challenges. And so how do you push? So when we talk about being part of the infrastructure, once again, a lot of the tools out there, make it easier to get apps on devices. I mean, I've known some folks, you can waste an hour just getting an app on a device. Yeah. So those are efficiencies you can get. I think it's come so fast and so hard. People just know it's hard, and they know they could be doing it better. And I don't think they've had a chance to figure out just yet how hard and how much better. But what we see is it's just picking up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger as people solve the problem and keep looking to solve the problem.
And one of the other interesting trends, too, that we're starting to see with people's device labs getting larger is the role of a lab manager is coming back. I don't know if any of you have been around long enough to, I know back in the day, at one point we had a designated rotating schedule where we had a bunch of, 50 PCs. This is back in the day when I worked at SunTrust. And somebody had to manage those, right? We had a Windows 95, a Windows 98, different browsers. That role is coming back, especially with a lot of the fragmentation we see out there. It's a big challenge to try to make sure these devices are provisioned properly, have the right firmware running, virus-free, all those, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Also, there are some improvement even in the traditional tools. Like, I don't know if you use Quality Center ALM at all. So you can actually report a defect directly from your mobile phone. So you can download a mobile app to do that from HP Live Network. Sprinter now works with mobile, and like nobody knows this. I mean, I used to go around the world telling people this, and everybody's like, "Really? You can report a defect directly from your phone, and press screen print and so forth, and you just download it for free off HP Live Network." The other one that nobody knows about, was I thinking? I'll think about it. Yeah, now this is a bunch of tools that are available that kind of make that part easier. But it's not only automating the test, it's automating the setup and the tear down and all that type of stuff that really helps.
I have a question. If you guys could send Costa your list of tools, we could put that out on our website for people to go look up. That would be great, because I know I can benefit from that personally.
Sure.
I didn't know you had that for ALM.
Yeah, a lot of people don't.
Oh, yeah.
It is, yeah, and they just came out with this thing called Mobile Center that actually can manage your, yeah.
Yes.
I wonder about the not needing crowdsourcing, because even with all that we've discussed, my settings on my phone, and I was playing Google Music before I brought up your app, and I don't want your app to stop my music. And when I get a text from my husband, it rings a bell, and each environment is so different. My settings are different, that if you do what you say you've got, it seems like a wonderful beginning testing is to have a clean phone with nothing on it but your app. But at some point, you got to get to where I have this,